let's go now into a bit of a deep dive into the situation in Israel and, of course, the weekend's historic referendum vote. And who better than Greg Sheridan, Foreign Affairs Editor at The Australian, to do that with me now. Greg, thank you. I don't want to trawl over old ground, old and I say recent days ground. I want to focus, if we can, on what happens next. I can't imagine the choice that goes through the minds of government officials and intelligence agencies and the military at the moment. Hundreds of innocent civilians, Israelis in Gaza, yet the retribution must come for the terror attack that occurred last Sunday. And we've got all of those reservists called up, 300,000 of them now in the borderlands of Gaza, and of course some up the north near the Hezbollah border. Where do they go from now?
Well, Peter, it's good to be with you even in this week of darkness and madness. So Hamas killed about 1,200, a bit more than 1,200 Israelis, mostly civilians, the greatest massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. And Hamas really is a kind of Arab Nazi movement. It's a death cult. It's at the moment, the Israelis are continuing to bombard Gaza and to try to destroy and degrade Hamas's ability to wield large weapons systems. But I think there may be probably about 160 hostages in Gaza. The Israelis will certainly be conscious of the hostages and doing everything they can to rescue them. But I don't think the hostages will act as a shield for Hamas in Gaza. I think the Israelis will have to mount a ground invasion fairly soon, and their objective will be to destroy Hamas. So they will be wanting to eliminate the leadership of Hamas and to destroy Hamas as a movement. And whatever arrangement comes at the end of that, Hamas can't come back to power. It's likely to be a very bloody and bitter business because this is very densely populated urban warfare that we're going to see. Hamas loves death. It's prepared for this. This is what it wanted to happen. There'll be booby traps, IEDs, snipers, human suicide bombers, all the rest of it. This is going to be very ugly, but Israel has no alternative. Otherwise, the future survival of the state of Israel, I think, would be very hard.
And what about the broader geopolitical sort of consequences, the role that you see Iran has played here? What your take is on this whole idea that Israeli-Saudi Arabian sort of peace talks might have precipitated Iran's engagement in this via Hamas. What's your thoughts?
I think it's overwhelmingly likely that Iran directed this, overwhelmingly likely. So the Biden administration is saying they haven't seen a smoking gun, pure proof. That's fair enough, I suppose. But of course, they don't want it to be Iran because that would throw into relief the utter foolishness of their own policy of trying to have their own rapprochement with Iran. They haven't been enforcing the sanctions against Iran. They've allowed $6 billion of frozen Iranian money to be released in exchange for Iran releasing a number of American hostages. So if it's established that Iran directed this, the Biden administration would be very embarrassed. But the Wall Street Journal revealed clear meetings between senior Iranian officials and Hezbollah and Hamas in the lead up to this. The Israeli analyst Ehud Yari, the best of all the Middle East analysts, says that the Iranian Quds Force leader has been meeting with Hamas and Hezbollah leaders every fortnight in Lebanon for months. It's inconceivable that Hamas did this against Iran's wishes. And certainly Iran wanted to stop the Israeli-Saudi Arabia normalization because that would lead to a de facto alliance of the two biggest powers in the Middle East apart from Iran itself, both of whom have a lot to fear from Iran and have a lot of interests in common. I'm sure that gruesome and hideous as this is, Hamas wants a very big Israeli operation in Gaza. They may well then have an assurance that Hezbollah will attack Israel from the north. And we know that Hezbollah has about 150,000 rockets, which are more formidable than the Hamas rockets. And this is a very suitable scenario for Iran because it gets to attack Israel on multiple fronts. Maybe Houthis will fire, Iran-sponsored Houthi rebels in Yemen will fire missiles at the southern Israeli port of Eilat. Islamic Jihad in the West Bank may attack. So Iran can orchestrate all this murder and mayhem against Israel while still having a level of deniability itself. The Americans have moved the aircraft carrier Gerald Ford into the Mediterranean, and they've told Iran, I think, in pretty straightforward terms, if you engage militarily yourselves against Israel, we'll engage with you. So the stakes and the dangers here are enormous. Israel may well have to fight a war on several fronts. It must destroy Hamas. It must keep its northern border secure, and it must protect its interests in the West Bank. And it has to do that all simultaneously with an army which is made up of reservists who are very competent, but, you know, they're mainly office workers and regular folks and so on. They only serve in the military a couple of months a year. So this is an enormous, terrible challenge for Israel.
I've got to ask you, given we've got the Voice on the weekend, the Voice referendum vote, earlier in the debate, the Prime Minister and others said, you know, we'll be seen very poorly around the world if this referendum is defeated. They say that on one hand, but you've got all these frontbenchers, Tony Burke and others, who have not called out the anti-Semitic hate we've seen spewing out on the streets of Sydney. And you've also got the situation where the police are impotent. The Premier took some time to get out there and deal with the situation in Sydney. And I think, to be fair, the Prime Minister himself has been very, very weak in his language broadly about Israel, but also specifically about these pro-Hamas rallies in Sydney. How do you see all of that playing out?
Well, I thought the situation on Monday night was a terrible disgrace, a shameful moment in Australian history. What the state authorities said was, you Jews who live in Sydney are not safe in this part of the city, Town Hall and not in the Opera House, and we're not going to guarantee your safety, and we're not going to try to guarantee your safety. We will, however, facilitate, in order to avoid violence, this march by extremists who end up shouting, F the Jews, gas the Jews, death to the Jews. Now, I give Chris Minns credit. The next day, he recognised the enormity of what had happened in Sydney, and he took control. And frankly, he's the only Labor politician in the entirety of this business who has looked like an adult, who looks like he has any understanding of what he's dealing with. The Albanese ministers and the other state government ministers, including Jacinta Allen in Victoria, it's as if, you know, the only way they can conceive of international events is through ethnic branch stacking or something. They just seem to be completely out of their depth. It's not only that they absolutely lack moral clarity, that they absolutely lack moral courage, but they seem to have actually no idea of what, you know, they're just so provincial. They just seem to have no idea of the forces that they're dealing with. And I think it's been a very poor performance at all levels from the Labor Party, except I'd say for Chris Minns after the first day.
It has been shameful. I look forward to more from you in the Australian, Greg. Your writing's been harrowing, but beautifully put. Thank you.